Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we welcome back an old friend of the channel, and that is Bitcoin Benny. He's over in Southeast Asia working in the startup space, and I really want to dive into what's going on, particularly in China, with all this intellectual property and the business model of copying different tech ideas and businesses and whatnot. So no one's better qualified to talk about it than you, Benny. But for those that haven't watched our previous interviews, maybe give them a quick rundown of where you are and what you do.
Yeah, so was the GM of Komodo, and Komodo, as people know, is a very advanced tech platform and open source. And we decided that it needed a red hat to its Linux, and decided that we should build out some actual companies on top of the technology. And so moved to Vietnam, knowing that Southeast Asia is one of the most progressive regions of the world, and Vietnam's absolutely booming. It's got one of the best tech reputations in the world. So we've moved here. We replicate companies, and so that the copyright stuff's very pertinent to us. But we mainly target the Chinese companies because of their ability to scale and how quickly they've been able to innovate over the last few years. So we're pretty close to that action, and we copy a lot of the structures and models from China, and therefore are very, very close to what's happening as far as the government regulations and the trade wars are concerned.
So are you copying the ideas that they've maybe copied off the US, or more original ideas coming out of China?
We look at, we've got a 9-point funnel system, and we put through projects that are not emotive based or what we think will work. We stick to the digital economy. We try and promote digital inclusion, and we stick to e-commerce, e-media, e-travel, and logistics and supply chain side of things. So we look for things that exist elsewhere that are in demand here that haven't yet made their way here. And it sounds pretty cheeky to say, but it's kind of like, sometimes it's like when we were looking at Myanmar last week, it's like going back in a bit of a time machine. We get to kind of come in with, we know what's coming next, but we can actually skip the logical progression of, like for example, in the telco network, making a phone call, then moving across to data usage, we can go straight into, here's a smartphone, here's content, it'll change your life, boom, from having nothing to nearly caught up.
And I've done some really interesting interviews with a number of guys lately. There was one from India recently, and it is just that billion people that they're 10 or 20 years behind the West, and you can just see what's coming, and they're going to skip a lot of that infrastructure like banks and telephone lines, as you say. But I maybe wanted you to give people a background, because when we say copying ideas, and in Australia we think if someone copied your business or stole the idea, you'd be in trouble. Or how does it work with the patent side of things, or just copying different ideas with regulation?
Yeah, so that's the difference. The key issue is generally technology. So, you look at the US and China trade war. There was a famous Synoval AMSC case some years back, where an American-based company, Massachusetts-based company, was based in China. We're dealing with China, and China was accused and then later prosecuted for stealing the technology that was used in their products. So the thing is, these things get caught up in the court systems for such a long period of time, and by the time people get a payout, it's nothing compared to what they've lost in or generated in sales. So the copywriter can quite often get away with a good deal. But the issue is, for us, is that we're going in with blockchain and emerging tech. So we've partnered with an AI company, and we're looking at these emerging techs. We've just employed a robotics and mechatronics engineer. This is the way forward. We definitely see this, and automation is key to scaling at these massive rates that the markets demand. So where we skirt around that is, we don't try and take something that's a patented technology, implement it into our business structure. We create a business model that or replicate a business model that works, and we use a different underlying technology to give us an advantage. Because if you go head to head with an Amazon or a Facebook or an Alibaba, you're going to lose. I mean, these guys have got huge experience. They know what they're doing. They've got money. They can just squash you like an ant. You have to do something different to make yourself appealing to those guys.
Yeah, we'll get into that partnership a little bit later. But again, just for people at home, maybe a good analogy is that, we have Uber and then Lyft can come along and I guess replicate the business model, the idea, because they're not using anything that's proprietary or technology or patented or anything like that. Is that sort of a good analogy?
Yeah, well, I was working at Grab. I was a C-level at Grab, and Grab's the major competitor to Uber in Southeast Asia, and actually Uber no longer exists in the market. And when I was there, that was our key focus, to try and get Uber out of the market. But the interesting thing is, a company like that, they'd have various differences in their apps. Like, for example, Uber will tell you how far away in time the driver is, whereas Grabs will tell you it won't be time-based, it'll be distance-based. It'll say it's 2 kilometers away. So they use slightly different variations in their base offering and structure, but the differences would be, for example, Grab had Grab Taxi and started off being a taxi service on app, then branched out into the cars and went into the same realm. So there's always slight differences between them, and they use different technology, underlying technology.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe you've got some other examples for us, because I know throughout history there has been plenty of cases where a competitor has come in and it's those subtle, maybe cultural differences, or even the protectionism with, the Huawei versus Apple phones in China. So have you got a few interesting examples of places where maybe the little guy has beaten the big guy, or different ideas have worked, well in certain countries?
Yeah, I think there's no better story than I use Jack Ma. I mean, China's obviously the topic of the day. That's an example of where a guy's come along and said, "Listen, we want to become this e-commerce platform." He did a few ingenuity things. He got 18 people together, borrowed 60K, talked them into this is going to be the next big thing. When they progressed, and then eBay came into the market. So this is something that this is a really interesting story. eBay was coming into the Chinese market, and he said, "We're in big trouble. If we fight a shark in the ocean, we're going to lose. So we have to be a crocodile in a river." So how we have to do it is, at that stage, 1% of China had credit cards, and we're using those for online purchases. So what he did was, he literally went around to every branch of every bank in China with foot soldiers, opened up accounts, said, "We're not going to charge fees." Then we've automatically created the country's biggest escrow system. If you buy something online, you've got to go into a bank. You don't have to have a bank account. Put the cash into that account, notify us that you've received the payment. We'll notify the seller to ship you the goods. And then what we'll do is we'll release the money to the seller. So by doing that, skip years and years on, a decade later, they now control hundreds of billions of dollars of personal wealth that they've created through saying, "Hey, you can actually sign up to our app. You can actually use this as a form of payment," and they've bypassed money. So the example would be this is a guy that started with no money, that basically just turned around and said, "There's an opportunity to capitalize here." And if the reason that's a great story is because there was no tech to utilize. He actually went to banks and signed up and did something physical and laborious that people wouldn't even contemplate doing.
Yeah, it's interesting, the different methods of. It's always about saving people time, though, isn't it? And efficiencies and whatnot. And I'm sure there's plenty of use cases that you guys are focusing on. So, what are some of the more interesting projects that are solving maybe real world problems in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, it's a different mentality, and I think that unless you've been here or you live here, it's kind of hard for people outside to understand. So it's, we're not from here, but we spend a lot of time here and we get to see it. So we've got a kind of dual perspective, but we're talking about a lot of people who live cash in a cash environment, and they don't have access to credit cards, to banks. Yeah. And people think, why not? There's banks. I've been to Asia and there's banks everywhere. It's really hard to sort of become part of the system. Some people don't want to, they don't trust it. And technically speaking, there's technology now that allows people to bypass that as well, which is a pretty controversial topic. But the thing is that we do definitely see that there's major differences in what is needed here. And the interesting thing is that Southeast Asia aren't trying to tackle the problem of saying, let's get these people basic services that are taken for granted in the Western world. They're saying, what are the services that are coming next to the Western world? what can we learn from that, and how can we innovate? So China got into a lot of trouble because they said, yes, we tried to copy America, and yes, we tried to copy these developed nations, and yes, we tried to catch up to them. But then we faced a dilemma. Once we caught up to them, there's no playbook. So then we had to innovate, and we had to work out how we push forward and progress without someone to copy or follow. So it's a very interesting mentality here, and the mentality definitely is very parochial, and each of these countries has a different culture and a different way of doing business. And that's why companies like your Rocket Internets, who have been hugely successful in Europe and other parts of the world, try and come in here, use a cookie cutter approach of cut and paste, and it doesn't work. So they have to refine their methodology. It's if you think one size fits all in this region, you're sorely mistaken.
Yeah, and the statistics around like how quickly, I think it was WeChat and whatnot, within 2 years it went from a few percent to 90% of people. So I know when I was talking again to these other guests recently, they were saying that we're so sort of close to that hockey stick moment where there's 4G internet in a lot of these places now. There's a lot of phones or smartphones is forever increasing as well. So do you think it's just now a matter of time until it really just opens up everything from e-commerce, communication?
Yeah, look, I've got a long telco background, as you probably know. So this is like, for me, this has been probably one of the greatest gifts of my life to work in a fast-moving, highly disruptive tech space. If you look at Nigeria, they put in a 4G network and became the richest country in Africa. You look at Myanmar, where we were last week. I was there for the rollout and worked on the government released 2 licenses, and we did the rollout of 4G. It was the first time the country had ever had proper internet connectivity. There wasn't any. And so what happened is I've gone back there last week, and now there's all these e-commerce businesses going in there, and there's all these platforms popping up left, right, and centre. And it wasn't, it's not that long ago, and it still happens that you're seeing monks walking along the street and people still wearing the traditional sarong type wraps with shirts and thongs and flip-flops, and you're thinking they don't have a pocket to put stuff in. But the reason I make that example is because it really hits home that anybody thinking that you can give those people something that is outside of their mobile phone and it's going to be adopted is severely delusional. These people connect to the internet through their phone. The phone is their life. You can't start saying, here's a plastic card from a bank that we're going to give you in addition to this, and here's this and here's that. It's just not going to take in those countries. A recent survey said that 83% of Myanmar residents thought that Facebook is the internet.
Yeah.
So we've gone from it's a different world, but what the possibilities it opens up possibilities for these tiny little corner stores to become online e-commerce providers. And in using Myanmar as a topic, because that's where we're going to launch an app, is that $6 million was the entire e-commerce market in 2017. Yet Alibaba and Tencent are investing $6 and $7 million into companies like ours, like apps to go in and push the economy forward. The grey market is massive. People have Facebook businesses that are online retailers that make huge amounts of money. It's a fascinating world, and you're right. I think this technology and the hockey stick type of growth is 100% coming. But when you've only got like 40% of the whole of Southeast Asia as part of the digital economy, it hasn't even really started as to what can happen once we start bringing people on.
So you mentioned that they're not trusting of banks or a plastic card. How is the digital payment space evolving, and is that something where you see Bitcoin catching on, or more stable coins, or a government issued stable coin they'll force people to use? How do you see that all playing out?
It's different in different countries here, but we're doing some work with the Philippine government and soon Vietnam governments as well. But most of the governments in the region are very pro-blockchain. They think the technology is awesome and very anti-crypto. Now, the reason that anti-crypto is not for the reasons that people think, and that's because it's hugely scammy and there's heaps of fraud and all the rest of it. They don't want their local currencies replaced with something else. They want to be able to control the currency. So the rules are very simple, and that is in Vietnam, for example, you cannot replace the dong, the local currency, with a cryptocurrency for the purchase of anything that is normally purchased with dong. That's it. That's simple. You can buy it, you can sell it, you can trade it, but you can't use it to buy goods and services. So I think that the question is really interesting, and I think the banks are quite desperate. I mean, when we went to Myanmar, started talking to banks as well, saying, can you help us get users? Can you help us get people to get a credit card? And can you help on board? So there's a vested interest for a lot of these tech companies going into these countries to try and go through the old banking system because they get paid for that. But technically, there's no reason that should happen. I mean, there's look at what WeChat has done and look at the money system that they've created. People just don't walk around with money anymore.
Yeah, that is.
And
that's really interesting to think about. But I guess the main benefit that I see from Bitcoin is the fact that it's the hyperinflation, or when governments aren't disciplined. It's not necessarily the spending. So in that example, you could still have all your savings in dong and still buy your bread and milk at the point of exchange or whatnot. So do you see that as a use case to save people from the effects of hyperinflation or whatnot? Or do you think that if everyone is parking their money in dong and still spending, parking in Bitcoin but spending dong in that example, the governments would have to crack down further?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I think we still have usage and storage issues as far as security is concerned, obviously, and there's a lot of people that have been stung. So the governments try and take the angle of we're protecting people, whereas in actual fact, we know the real agenda. But they're trying to be progressive and they're trying not to miss out on the next boom and all the rest of it. But it's very, very hard to see how people that don't understand or try and understand how cryptocurrency actually works and how Bitcoin works, how they're going to make that logical progression. And I mean, I've sat in on boards where legislation has been being formed, and these people that are actually forming that legislation have absolutely no understanding of what it is they're actually talking about. So this is it's a very big problem, and I think that there's a long way to go before we see this adopted as far as an alternative. And I think that if you want to look at a working model, again, if you go back to the WeChat model and you look at what WeChat's actually done in China and converted the whole country to electronic payment systems, let's be honest, let's take our hats off for a second. That's a living use case and proof and something that people could copy, versus Bitcoin being as established as a national currency hasn't happened yet anywhere. So I think, to be honest, it's an uphill battle, and I think that someone's got to take the plunge and show that it can be pulled off. But we're definitely learning lessons, but I can't see it happening in the near future.
And I know in China, I'd love to get your thoughts around what's going on there, because we've seen things like CZ say, or there was rumors that they were going to move back to Shanghai, and then the office raid news happened, and they've kind of denied that. And I've heard that OKX and Huobi that are close to the CCP have kind of got a bit of a pass, and other exchanges haven't. So it's all a bit of a grey area. Have you heard much about what is going on with crypto in China?
Yeah, actually, we talked to some of those people, so I have to be guarded what I say. But yes, the thing is that it's not easy, and a lot of those exchanges and a lot of those businesses, let's just call them businesses, a lot of those businesses have been built on the back of doing one thing and doing it at mass volume to make money. When people aren't doing retail trade, which is happening now, so a lot of as we know, almost all of the volumes are fake. And then you couple that with the fact that new listings are not allowed to go on most of the Chinese-based exchanges now, no new coins. And they're starting to delist a lot of coins as well. Those companies can't make money anymore. So they're saying, hang on, we haven't thought about this very well. And you would assume that they would have squirreled away hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin with the daily volumes that they're doing, but that is not the case. And those people and those companies are looking for ways to diversify and increase their revenue streams, and they're looking for how to make money. It's come full circle, to be honest, and it's kind of a bit refreshing, because they've had their time at the top, but China has really curtailed their ability to be able to generate sustainable incomes, for sure.
Very interesting you say that, because I know Huobi came to Australia and they failed, and I tried to tell them what they need to do to differentiate themselves, and they just didn't do anything to stand out. And we got an email this week from a couple of the other Chinese exchanges saying, hey, we're coming to Australia. So obviously, yeah, Binance have, I guess, set the bar, haven't they? They're trying to expand in all these countries and maybe stay ahead of regulation, because it's just the most interesting part to me, how governments are going to react. And I think in a lot of ways, it doesn't really matter what the rules are. We've seen in the past, even if you make something illegal, if there's actual hyperinflation and civil unrest and people are saying, I don't care what you tell me, if you're going to ruin my life savings, I'm going to buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think that it gets a bad name, and it gets bad raps for being used for the wrong reasons and all the rest of it. But I know, anything that comes through here, we hear about a lot of big Bitcoin deals and people looking to buy Bitcoin OTC and sell Bitcoin, and that market's really healthy for Bitcoin. But the issue is that it's very, very hard to connect the buyers to the sellers, because you get flagged. I mean, Australia's moving towards the $10,000 transfers, and it's very, very difficult when you've got a person who says, I've got tens of millions of dollars to invest in Bitcoin, and someone says, I've got tens of millions of dollars to sell of Bitcoin. There's still a big issue getting those people together.
Yeah.
So especially across borders, and for obvious reasons. But the thing is that when you're looking at that as a solution, and you're looking at that as a vessel for payments, it's still really, really difficult to transact in large volumes. And I mean, it's difficult to transact in large volumes in cash. So it's really, really hard to see how it will play out. And 2 years ago, I would have told you I've got very clear ideas, and it's obvious what's going to happen. But I think as time's gone on, and as the global economy is coming under duress and all the rest of it, and the whole America-China thing's happening as well, and lots of unrest in different countries, it's really, really hard to see how the dynamics will all play as one global environment. I think it's going to happen at a country level.
Yeah, and I think the currency wars is where this is going to play out. So if the US dollar keeps getting stronger and these emerging markets, their currency's getting weaker and weaker, that's when I think it does put the pressure on people to maybe go into something like Bitcoin and gold. And now they've all got a phone. Is it easier to go into something digital like Bitcoin than gold, and in smaller amounts? So Bitcoin does have all that in its favor, and that's where I'm still pretty hopeful about how it's going to play out. But what are your thoughts, and what have you heard around the US-China trade war, and is other parts of Asia looking to capitalize on any losses that China may have?
Well, China's done a couple of things that a lot of people don't realize very well. So they've made a lot of investments in like Africa and South America. And what they do when they make those investments into raw materials is that with those investments and the purchases of those companies comes people that build infrastructure and buildings. So what the Chinese do is move into those countries and build roads and ports so that they can ship those raw materials back to China. It's a very, very, they call it the buy the world over here. So China's got a real buy the world strategy. And China have to take into consideration that in the more mature markets of electronics and cars, in which they play heavy hands in, those types of markets they've been a little bit more okay with as far as introducing heavier fines for IP and all the rest of it, because they're more mature markets. But as they progress and become market leaders, they have to put more effort into IP protection, because it's going to be them that stands to lose as they progress. In 2017, they imported 144,000 robots into the country. 3/4 of all of the robots that were coming in were imported. So they're looking at getting into this the higher grade manufacturing, which is dominated by the more developed countries. So they effectively have to move quickly on protecting IP and getting a bit smarter with that. At this stage, it suits them not to, but in the very near future, they'll be exposed.
Yeah, it is. People say data's the new oil, and that's really where the trade war is heating up. And it hasn't maybe been talked about yet that that's the case. But I read last week that China were going to have a law where there's no encryption for any companies that are based in China. So they want to be able to access all the data of any overseas companies that are in China. And we've heard that all the technology underpinning 5G, when that rolls out in America, there'll be little backdoors and whatnot, so they can monitor it. Are you familiar with all that?
Yeah, it's constantly talked about over here as well. I think the thing is that I don't take sides in any way, shape, or form. But I mean, when you're talking about big business and you're talking about the Chinese have been, um, you know, they've been accused of deflating their economy. They've been accused of trying to open up foreign markets. They've been accused of copywriting. They've been accused of a lot of different types of things. And I mean, the thing is that they have been very focused on protection, and they've been focused on building things from within. And they want to be not the biggest in China. They want to be the biggest in the world. And they have a huge consumer demand. I mean, look at the size of their population. And they've got, America's putting extra taxes and tariffs on imports. And the thing is that the Chinese are trying to become largely self-sufficient. So I think that they also understand that they don't have expertise and data in a lot of different areas, and everybody realizes that data is the new oil. All of these companies like your Grabs and Ubers are all moving into financial markets. They're trying to extend the amount of data they have on people to be able to do targeted marketing and to be able to offer financial solutions. This is a really big war that a lot of people are just sort of blind to.
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget that China was a superpower for thousands of years, and people say they kind of fell behind for 100 years. And now they want to get back to number one. And it's just like, from my perspective, it's kind of looking at the ego of the US for Donald Trump or whatever's happening. And there's plenty of people out there that, don't have egos. I'm not saying that about all Americans, but just really appears that they love that supremacy, particularly with the US dollar and those other benefits. But it's not going to be something where they, go down quietly.
And the thing is that there's a lot of these Chinese companies that are worth huge amounts of money. And Xiaomi, for example, is a handset manufacturer that's sort of taken a heap of market share off Samsung. And they've made, people make derogatory comments in China about the US. And I mean, back in 2015, January or end of 2014, Xiaomi was saying, if you were back in the day of retail sales, if you had a shop, it was all about location, and whoever had the best location would win. Then we moved into the PC internet era, and it was all about traffic, and whoever had the most traffic won. And it's been said in derogatory fashion, the Americans are still there. They're still trying to get downloads and click-throughs and all the rest of it. The Chinese are firmly focused on time. They believe in the mobile internet era, it's all about time. And if you can get a customer's time, you will win the war. And a lot of the companies that come out, like your short content platforms like TikTok, you'd think to yourself, how's that get time? It's like 15-second clips and all the rest of it. But it's so engaging and it attracts people's attention that they're hooked on these platforms, and they're hooked on this growth. And nobody's been able to scale at these types of volumes. They're very progressive at working out how to move ahead very quickly and how to scale. And they have this rule of not having a plan to deal with things once they've moved to the level of innovation after catch-up. So they basically say, we have to be extremely reactive to feedback and to be able to act immediately on that feedback. And that's what's kind of pushed and surged them ahead. But these guys they're playing in a different world, and it's a massive country with massive labor force, and they move quickly.
It's so interesting you say that, because I know, at Nuggets News, we've kind of got a similar model where we don't really think too far ahead, because the crypto space can just change on a dime, from ICOs to IEOs, the STOs, and now DeFi, and what people are going to want to be interested in. You've got to have a model for long form content like our interviews and podcasts, and then short form clips to get people's attention. It really is all about respecting people's time and attention and giving them value in whatever way is appropriate to that individual platform.
We've learned a lot, and I think that if you and I are a little bit older than a lot of these kids coming through now that are picking up, they don't know life without smartphones. And the thing is that the whole we've heard Simon Sinek talk about the millennials and all the rest of it. The thing is that people want an answer, and they want it now. They want 24/7 service and assistance and all the rest of it. So we've had to we've said blockchain's great and it underpins all of our differential offerings as far as tech's concerned, but we've had to move into partnerships with AI and emerging technology companies, because we realised that the ability to scale and to meet the demands 24/7, we have to be using things like chatbots and artificial intelligence.
Oh,
if we don't do that, we're dead.
Completely agree. And did you want to talk about the new partnership you've got? This company's working in AI, Internet of Things, emerging tech, and the problems. You just mentioned a few of them then, but the problems that it's going to solve for you?
Yeah, so as we scale, we realised we've got a structure where we don't ever really want to get above about 30 core team members. If one part of our business requires a lot of attention and money, say for example, we've got a marketing arm and 7 people, we should be spinning that off. We're a replication company into a marketing company, billing those services to ourselves at no cost and on billing to outside clients. And we should be building a cost neutral, low capex model that allows, and we should be building partnerships that allow us to scale quickly. We shouldn't try and take the time necessary to learn things that we're not good at, that we need now or in the coming year or so. We should actually partner with people who are experts and then learn from them later, replicate and do ourselves and bring in-house. But we've partnered with an AI firm that's in Bangladesh, Singapore, and also Myanmar, ex-Rocket Internet. So similar mindset. They understand what we're doing. They understand what we're trying to do. They're working with all the Fortune 500s, and we've basically said, look, this is what we're doing. They get it. They understand it. They've worked in those companies before, and they've said, you need help from people like us to be able to scale quickly. And we can also help you develop tools that you can use, but we can also use to offer. So we'd use them under license, and they can be developed in conjunction with us at no cost to us, which allows us to be able to have a really, really good partnership in bringing them into the other countries of Southeast Asia that we're in. But we need like-minded people like this that understand that it's we're going to grow together. And then this has just opened up the doorways for us to be able to expand. As soon as we've started saying we're a venture builder that deals in emerging tech, doors opened straight away. We've been banging the drum for ages saying we're a blockchain venture builder, the first in Southeast Asia, and we're doing this and this and this, and people go, don't understand it, don't get it. As soon as we say emerging tech, and that's why we're going through a refresh now of our brand, doors just open, and these big companies want to talk because they're all facing the same challenges, and we're facing the same pool of adoption and high tech and emerging tech eating their market shares. So everyone wants to protect their base and grow their base. So this partnership definitely allows us to add to our blockchain base, but as our mission has always been since the beginning, is don't let any end user understand or know or need to know the underlying technology. So it just clicks together and helps us to move 10 times faster with a much bigger team.
Yeah, you mentioned Bangladesh, and I was going to say you're fairly familiar with the tech space in Australia. So is there way more appetite and number of developers, that talent pool in all these other countries now that are pretty highly populated compared to Australia? Do you think that Australia's falling behind in the tech scene? Are you worried about our economy? Have you watched all the videos we've been doing about that?
Yeah. I can only give you my opinion, and my opinion is only based on the information I've received on the subject. But depending on what you read, there's about 81,000 to 110,000 IT graduates that come through in Vietnam every year, for example. They're number 3 in the world for tech as far as resource and ability is concerned. Those people in a population of nearly 100 million, a lot of people are coming out. And if you go back into the Y Combinator days and listen to all the Sam Altman and Paul Graham stuff about all you've got to do is code, and you've got to get something to market. Don't worry about it being perfect. Test it, get it into users' hands, make money, show that there's an appetite for it. There's a lot of people coming through with a mentality of, I can build an app that's needed here. I can see what's needed and the demand for it. You got a lot of talented people coming through, creating a lot of cool stuff. And a lot of people are saying that areas like Vietnam will be the next big, like the Silicon Valley of Asia. Why not? And I think that all these kids are focused on building apps that make life easier and building technology and software that makes life easier. So I think that there's how can, I know I'll probably get shot down for this, but how can Australia compete with the volumes and the numbers of people that are coming out educated in those fields, concentrated on delivering? Because again, in Australia, I can go get a qualification and I can come out, and it's still, by comparative standards, it's still relatively easy for me to find something that I can put my mind and effort to that can earn me an income. Whereas in a country like this, I'm singing for my supper.
Yeah.
I've got to
And
stand
that means
out.
wages are a lot lower. So even Australian companies can hire people and work remote. And as you saw yesterday, the latest results about science and maths, our kids are just getting worse and worse every
Yeah.
year at a time when we've just got all these graduates with, the freedom to do what they want, better tax in a lot of these countries as well. We saw Israel went all in on tech a few years back, didn't they? And now they're killing it. And I
Oh
just
yeah.
think, like, what is Australia doing?
Israel have like up to 31% of the world's startups that are listed on the. I mean, startups are listed on the Nasdaq. I mean, at most stages they've had more startups listed on the Nasdaq than the whole of Europe combined, including Germany. So I mean, they're innovation hubs for the world, and they've led the way since since the early 2000s. But I think my perception might be skewed, but I look at the way these guys study, and I look at the way these guys are pushed by their parents. I'm not saying it's healthy in any way, shape, or form, but unless you perform and unless you're in that top echelon, unless you work your way to the top, you're in big trouble. So the thing is that I don't know that necessarily, and this is a perception of being an Australian outside of Australia, looking back into Australia, I don't think the same appetite or the same type of, and again, like I say, I don't know if that's healthy, but or sustainable. But these guys have been doing it for a long time, and you're just another number in a system here. You've got to really break your way out, and we're lucky in Australia to have a lot of the stuff that we have and the privileges that we get. But on the same token, I believe, and again, I'm probably going to get shot for this, I reckon it makes us a little bit soft. If you compare it to the rest of the world, there's no real incentive to push that little bit harder.
Yeah, I think we've very much been the lucky country, and that's maybe why we've become a bit relaxed. And it's not going to stay that good forever if you don't keep pushing and innovating. But next thing I want to talk about was another branch of what you're doing. So Red Fox Labs, the gaming stuff. So any news there?
Yeah, so what we've done is we were told that you couldn't put 100% game logic on the blockchain. It's not ready for it. It's not capable for it, and all the rest of it. Now, as you know, we work with JL777, who's widely regarded as being one of the masterminds of the blockchain space. And through his devotion and help, and through another amazing developer there, we have worked out a way to make that happen, and it has happened. So we've got all the logic on, and it's more than 2,000 lines of code, so it's pretty heavy and dense. And if it wasn't for these crypto condition contracts, it wouldn't be available or possible. So what we've done is we've reimagined a game that was very popular in the early 90s globally, and it's still talked about. There's lots of people that want its revival, and there's been a few apps that have come out that have sort of reinvented this game. And what we've decided is, as it has a collectible component, that we've made it an interactive NFT game. But people might say, well, okay, there's been other interactive NFT games, yes, that write information back to the blockchain. This is actually 100% on the blockchain. So what we've done is we've got the front end up and working now. All the visuals and graphics are well into development, and we just have to put polish on the buttons and dashboards and stuff like that. We're now at the point where we've integrated those two together. So we're just making sure it doesn't have any bugs and it's cohesive and all the rest of it. And then we're very, very lucky. You've talked to Art Klegger before. Having a guy like that that's had experience at H1Z1 and that come in and tell us, this is what people like to collect in the gaming space. These are the designs you need to do on the collectibles. People like me don't understand that type of stuff. That's the great thing about Red Fox. We don't profess to be experts in anything. We're not. We bring in the best of the best to help us with what we don't know. And it's come together in a way that was a proof of technology to show that it could be done. And now we're able to literally go out with a product that we're going to be really proud of, with a game that's definitely not AAA standard, but we weren't going to spend $14 million on developing a game. But we can now go out and say, here's NFT pieces that you can collect, buy, trade, sell, and utilize inside of a game. And even myself, I thought to myself, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it, because even though you're working on it, you're working towards it, there's so many things that could go wrong, or so many things where people are telling you it's impossible and can't get built. So to actually see it coming together is quite remarkable. It's amazing to look at the game and think it's a standalone. It could be a standalone game on an app and be okay. But to think that it's powered by blockchain is quite mind-blowing.
That's fantastic. I definitely think that my 3 big themes for 2020 are gaming, DeFi, and what was the final? Staking. So anything, I think interest rates are going to turn down again and go negative. So anything that's offering these staking rewards, as well as being an early play in the tech space and blockchain space, I think is going to be pretty attractive to people.
Mm-hmm. That's why we're releasing our first major project as a rewards and cashback app, and that will be coming out soon. It's going to be released in Myanmar first, but that's why we were there, because we've partnered with a company that has 11 million Facebook fans, and they're one of the biggest content and media creation platform there. They do work with Grab and all the big Fortune 500 brands, so we can tap straight into their audience and work with them. So what we believe is, you're right, we believe that the global economy doesn't look great, and there's people are looking for these types of rewards. So we're doing it in the way that if you watch a video, do a survey, give feedback, or purchase anything online through the app, what happens is you actually get points. You don't get a crypto coin, you don't get anything like that, but you get points. And those points can then be used to redeem for gift vouchers, for Grab rides, for Netflix subscriptions, and for things like that. So what we're trying to do is use that as a vessel to onboard people into the digital economy. And we're just working on a partnership now with a handset provider that would allow people to get top-level smartphones without having to go on any contracts or make any payments.
Fantastic. Well, Benny, I think we've touched on just about everything that I want to get through today. Did you have any final thoughts for us?
Just that it is a good space to look into, and if people want to, people might say after looking at this that I haven't been as bullish on Bitcoin or the blockchain space. That couldn't be further from the truth. I think it's a matter of when, not if. I'm just 100% unsure how the regulations around cryptocurrency will play out, and I think that anybody who says they know is probably having a wild stab in the dark, and it's going to be very different from country to country. But I think you're right. I think if you want one theme to really take away, you're talking about DeFi and gaming and staking. I think next year it's for this region, and that's why we're doing our refresh, and this is what we're going to be focused on, is digital inclusion. It's all about giving people access to this digital economy and onboarding people, and not using the traditional routes or methods of having to try and extract blood from people to be part of this. It should be you buy a phone and everything's pretty simple. It's all integratable and it's all interoperable. So I think it's going to be more about, my personal opinion is getting everything onto the phone, getting everything onto your mobile. Yeah. If it's not on your mobile, it's not going to get adopted.
I definitely agree. That's the biggest opportunity to open up the on-ramps and awareness of crypto and whatnot. So I'll put all the links to follow Benny, Red Fox Labs, and Komodo in the description below, guys. But thanks so much for joining us today, Benny.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.